The fire is already burning when she sees it. A wooden stake, a crowd pressed in tight, smoke curling into the gray morning sky of Rouen. In the center, a thin young woman in a plain dress, no armor, no sword, just chains around her ankles. She is 19 years old. Some in the crowd spit and curse, others quietly cross themselves. A few are crying. The bishop reads out the sentence. Her words have been called heresy, her visions madness, her courage treason. But as the flames are prepared, she does something unexpected. She asks for a cross, not to hold in triumph, but to cling to as she dies. How did a peasant girl, who could barely sign her own name, rise to command armies, challenge kings, and then be abandoned to the fire? And why does her story still burn in people's minds nearly 600 years later? This is Joan of Arc. This is the fearless flame of faith, and you're watching the Untold Spirit. To understand Joan, we have to start far from the fires of Rouen. Picture France in the early 1400s. It's not the proud, united country we imagine today. It's broken, bleeding. For decades, France and England have been locked in the 100 Years' War. Towns burned, fields ruined, whole regions passed back and forth like poker chips between kings and dukes. The French king has died, leaving behind a shaky heir known as the Dauphin, a kind of crown prince. His name is Charles, but many don't see him as a real king. The English control large parts of northern France. A rival French faction has sided with them. The royal court is full of doubt, fear, and scheming. Into this chaos, Joan is born. She comes from Domremy, a small village in northeastern France. Her parents are peasants. They work the land, they pay their taxes, they try to survive the war like everyone else. Joan doesn't grow up learning to read royal letters or studying maps. She grows up listening to the sound of church bells. She hears stories of saints and martyrs. She sees soldiers passing through. Sometimes she sees the damage they leave behind. Around her early teens, Joan begins to experience something she can't explain. She says she hears voices, not random whispers, clear, insistent messages from holy figures, saints and angels, telling her to live a pure life. And then, something even more unbelievable. They tell her that she has a mission. She must help drive the English out of France. She must see the Dauphin crowned in the city of Reims. Think about that. A teenage girl in a world where women not only don't command armies, they barely have a say in their own marriages. A nobody from a village almost no one at court could even find on a map. And yet, Joan becomes convinced that this impossible calling is hers. At first, Joan does what most of us might do with an impossible calling. She tries to ignore it. She keeps helping on the farm, she goes to church, but the voices, she says, don't go away. They grow more urgent. Finally, she does something radical for a peasant girl. She decides to act. She convinces a local official to take her to a nearby town, and then, after a lot of resistance, she sets her sights on something even harder, getting an audience with the Dauphin himself. This is not like sending an email to a politician. This means traveling through war zones. It means passing checkpoints filled with soldiers who might arrest, assault, or kill her. It means risking being dismissed as a madwoman, or worse, as a witch. But Joan keeps pushing. She speaks with local leaders, with clergy, with military men. Some laugh at her. Some are impressed by her intensity. Eventually, someone decides, fine, let her speak to the Dauphin. Maybe she can help. When Joan finally reaches Charles's court, she faces another test. Imagine stepping into a grand hall lit by torches and candles, tapestries on the walls, nobles watching you, whispering. Many are convinced this is a joke, a girl in peasant clothes,
claiming God has sent her to rescue France. And according to many later accounts, Charles decides to test her. He dresses like a normal courtier and hides among his men. Joan walks in, looks around, and, people say, walks straight to him. She kneels and calls him the true king of France. Something about her conviction, her calm, her belief, it gets to him. Still, Charles cannot risk everything on a teenager's visions, so the church steps in. Joan is examined by priests and theologians. They question her visions, her faith, her motives. Weeks pass. This is one of Joan's greatest inner conflicts. She knows what she believes she's been told, but she has to submit her mission to the judgment of men who outrank her in every possible way. In the end, they report that they find no obvious fault in her faith. She is given armor, a banner, and a small force to accompany her to a desperate battlefield, the siege of Orléans. Orléans is under attack by the English. If it falls, French morale could collapse. For months, the city has barely holding on. Supplies are low, spirits are lower. Into this rides Joan. Witnesses later recall not so much her sword, but her banner, a white flag with holy images flying above her as she moves along the lines. She doesn't just plan tactics, she speaks to the soldiers. She urges them to confess, to pray, to believe they can win. Her boldest choice is not about a single tactic, it's about refusing to accept the slow, hopeless grind of siege warfare. She pushes the commanders to go on the attack. To many, this is madness. The English are seasoned fighters. The French have been losing for years. Yet Joan insists now is the moment. Her conviction is contagious. In a series of fierce assaults, the French begin to push back the English positions around Orléans. Joan is in the thick of it, riding close to the fighting, carrying her banner. During one attack, she's wounded by an arrow. For many, that would be the end, a sign to retreat. For Joan, it becomes another test of will. She pulls back, receives basic treatment, and then returns to the battlefield, still urging the French forward. Soon after, the news everyone has been waiting for sweeps across France. Orléans is saved. The English have lifted the siege. People call Joan the Maid of Orléans. She has turned the war's mood from despair to possibility. But Joan's mission is not finished. She believes she must see Charles crowned in Reims, a city still behind enemy lines. This is not just a religious ritual, it's a political statement, a way to say to all France, this is your rightful king. Against the advice of more cautious commanders, she presses for a campaign towards Reims. Town after town opens its gates. English and Allied forces often withdraw rather than face this new wave of French confidence. Finally, in Reims, Charles is anointed and crowned. Joan stands nearby, her banner raised. For a moment, the impossible has happened. A peasant girl has helped put a crown on a king's head. But every rise in history has a shadow. After the coronation, the unity that Joan inspired begins to crack. The court returns to its old habits, politics, rivalries, caution. Charles becomes more hesitant, more influenced by advisors who view Joan as useful but dangerous. In a later campaign near the city of Compiègne, Joan is captured by enemy forces allied with the English. She is not taken by the English king or some great general, but by men who see her as a valuable prisoner to be sold.
And she is sold. The English pay for her custody. Now, Joan faces her last and most terrifying battlefield, a courtroom. She is brought to Rouen and put on trial, not as a soldier, not as a prisoner of war, but as a heretic. The trial is stacked against her from the start. A panel of judges, many of them hostile, layers of political pressure, English leaders who need her discredited, not martyred as a holy warrior. They question her visions. They attack her clothing. She has worn men's armor. and sometimes men's clothing for protection, which her accusers claim breaks church rules. They push her with tricky questions about faith, about obedience, about authority. Joan is young, exhausted, often sick, yet she answers with striking clarity at times. She insists that whatever voices spoke to her came from God. She refuses to deny the core of her experience. There are moments where she seems to bend under pressure, the threat of torture, the fear of execution. At one point, she appears to sign a document promising to change. But very quickly, she returns to her original stance. She won't deny what she believes God told her. For the men running the trial, this is enough. They declare her a relapsed heretic. The secular authorities sentence her to death. Which brings us back to the stake in Rouen. On that final morning, Joan asked for a cross. A sympathetic priest holds one before her eyes. Another fetches a wooden cross from a nearby church and plants it in the ground. Witnesses say she calls on Jesus as the flames rise. Some of her English enemies shout and mock. Others, even among the hardened soldiers, later admit they were shaken. One is said to have murmured, "We are lost. We have burned a saint." Joan dies at 19. The war will continue without her, but the memory of what she did and how she faced her end refuses to die. For years after Joan's execution, her story is twisted by politics. To her enemies, she had to be a witch, a fraud, a dangerous fanatic. To admit otherwise would be to admit that God might have favored France over England. Even in France, she made some in power uncomfortable. She was a reminder that courage and clarity can come from the edges of society, from people who do not fit the mold. Decades later, a new trial, ordered by the French king and the church, would review her case. This time, witnesses who had known her, villagers, soldiers, priests, testified to her courage and faith. The earlier trial was declared unjust. Joan's name was cleared. Centuries after that, the Catholic Church would officially recognize her as a saint. Statues would be raised. Churches would take her name. She would become, for many, a symbol of faith under fire. And yet, beneath the symbols and the stained glass windows, there is still the raw human story. A teenager who believed that the voice of conscience was not something to hide from, but something to follow, even when it dragged her into battlefields, throne rooms, and finally a courtroom set up to destroy her. A young woman who existed in a world that told her, over and over again, "Know your place," and who answered, quietly but firmly, "My place is where my calling leads me." Her story is often simplified into legend, the peasant girl who heard voices, led armies, and died a martyr. But inside that legend lies something deeply human: fear, doubt, pain, and a fierce will to keep going anyway. That is the untold spirit in Joan of Arc. Not just the miracles or the victories, but the decision to stand by what she believed was right, even when it cost her everything. For us today, her life raises questions we each have to answer. What do we do when our conscience pulls us away from safety? When the world says, "Stay small," and something inside us says, "Step forward"? If you'd like to hear more stories of hidden courage, forgotten struggles, and the quiet strength that shapes history, make sure to subscribe to The Untold Spirit and turn on notifications.